Hi, this is Andrea Vicari. You're listening to Jazz Doodles on jazzlondonradio.com. I'm very excited about today's show. I have a very special guest. I'm going to be interviewing Darius Brubeck. He's a jazz pianist, a composer, educator and academic, and of course the son of Dave Brubeck. If you're not familiar with Dave Brubeck, he wrote Take 5 and many other great hits many years ago. Darius Brubeck is going to join me now on the phone, and we're going to discuss his upcoming gigs and his tour next year to celebrate 100 years of the birth of his father, Dave Brubeck, and I will be announcing gigs right at the end of the show, just in case you want to catch some of them coming up. So here is my guest, Darius Brubeck.
Yes, he is the son of Dave Brubeck, but we're not particularly going to talk about that in this interview, except that it happens to be, am I correct? Is it his birthday? Would it have been his birthday today, and would he have been 99? I think I was told.
Yes, you're correct, December 6th. He was born December 6th, 1920, so next year will be his centennial year, 2020.
And you've got some gigs and celebrations lined up for next year. I noticed that you play with your two brothers, Chris and Dan, and a friend of mine also on sax called Dave O'Higgins. Is that going to be are there quite a lot of concerts, or is it just a few dates here and there next year?
Well, it's somewhere in between, Andrea. We're as usual playing at Ronnie Scott's next year, but it's a bit far out to be in time to be talking about now. But it's in March, and we have dates in Europe too. And before that, I'm going to be playing with them at Dizzy's at Jazz at Lincoln Center in January, and at the Jazz Education Network conference in New Orleans. And we'll be playing in our hometown of Wilton, Connecticut. All of that's happening in January.
I've noticed that you're playing at the Watermill in later in this year. The Watermill's in Dorking, and the reason I mention that particular venue is because they've just won Venue of the Year for the All Parliamentary Jazz Awards, which was very nice. And you probably don't remember this, but I actually met you and your niece when it used to be held at the Parliament Bar, and now it's actually at the Peach Express Holborn Live, and you were with your niece, who was called Lydia, and I'm a pianist and I also teach piano. I'm like, oh, you're poor Lydia, and I realised that you'd written it for your niece.
Actually, my granddaughter. But anyway,
sorry.
Okay, but you're thinking of the right person, yes, and she was thrilled to be at the Parliamentary Jazz Awards, and I was thrilled to be able to take her there because she was visiting us in England, and that was a nice moment.
That piece and Tugela Rail?
Tugela.
They're actually been used by an exam board here, the Associated Board, and actually Tugela Rail is a current piece. So actually, when I told them I teach some piano, and I said, I'm going to be interviewing you, their eyes were, and I said, have you got anything to ask him? But I think that was it. They just were so amazed. So but yeah, so you're well known, I think, is what I'm going to say, in the UK. But I think one of the things I wanted to talk about, first of all, is the fact that you've got a very, very upcoming gig at the Jazz Cafe on Saturday, the 14th of December. And this is a different band, isn't it, to the one that you have with your brothers?
Yeah, it can be confusing, so I'll spell it out. This is actually my regular group now. It's the Darius Brubeck Quartet.
Yeah.
And besides myself, Dave O'Higgins is the common denominator because he started working with Brubeck's Play Brubeck, which is the group with my brothers.
Okay.
Fully, it was, almost 10 years ago. Yeah, it was 2010.
Okay.
And the Darius Brubeck Quartet is London-based. My brothers live in Connecticut and Vancouver. So we do one tour a year, and they have very busy schedules on their own, and so do I. And we probably drive each other crazy if we had to go around the world together. But it's been perfect, though, to make it an annual event and play a few good venues like Dizzy's at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and Ronnie Scott's here, and we have a few other UK dates, which I'll send you, and then we're going to Switzerland. But the Darius Brubeck Quartet is playing on Saturday at the Jazz Cafe in Camden, and that is an auspicious date because it was exactly 60 years ago on December 14th that the Time Out album was released.
Oh, okay.
That's the album with Take 5 and Blue Rondo a la Turk. So those were at least two hits I've inherited. And so we're going to do one set that's a tribute to Time Out, and a second set that's the launch of our new album, Live in Poland.
Okay, and so maybe it'd be quite good to play a track from that album. Is there anything you'd like to play?
Okay, I think Matt the Cat actually sounds good on the air. It's up tempo and it's relatively brief compared to the other cuts on the album, and it's one of my originals. And of course, Matt Ridley is the bass player.
Of course, Matt Ridley. You see, I know all these people. Matt Ridley is a fine bass player, and I didn't connect it. So let's have a listen to Matt the Cat. That was Matt the Cat, and you're listening to Andrea Vicari on Jazz London Radio, and I'm talking to Darius Brubeck. I'm going to move the conversation along a little bit, and you've lived in many countries, obviously born in the States, I read that your wife is South African, and so you lived there for quite a while.
Yes.
And now you're in the UK, and I'm just wondering what's the attraction, because I keep thinking the States or the South Africa, the weather's great. I mean, we're an interesting country. We're going through a few bits of turmoil at the moment, but it's basically a very mild but grey country. So I just wondered what attracted you to live here.
Well, I think there are a lot of answers to that. A lot of factors in that. But first of all, it's just the simple position. You're not really that far from the east coast of the U.S. And when I play in America, most likely it's going to be someplace where I'd land in JFK first. And you're very close to Europe, maybe getting spiritually further away, but still the geography suits me. And after all, I'm an American citizen, so I'm neither better off nor worse off, no matter what happens. And culturally and in a way, again, geographically, I can't say that you're close to South Africa, but it's an easy route. You're well connected to South Africa. There's not much of a time change. Johannesburg time is the same as the time in Rome. Or it's only 6 months and an hour. It's different.
Yeah.
And as far as Great Britain, I get to both the States and South Africa often enough that it doesn't bring me down. And a lot of it is quite positive for me. First of all, the terrific musicians who are here and the guys who've been in my band for like 13 years. I should add Wesley Gibbons, so you have the complete lineup: Dave O'Higgins, Matt Ridley. Wesley Gibbons on drums comes from South Africa. We met when I was living down there. And that's nice because our concerts with the Darius Brubeck Quartet always incorporate a little bit of my South African experience and some of that repertoire, a lot of my originals, and of course, inevitably a couple of Dave Brubeck hits. But we can listen to the South African track from Live in Poland now. Okay, that's called Nomali, and it's composed by the late Hugh Masekela, who was a good friend of mine.
was Normali from Darius Brubeck's latest album, Live in Poland. So I was just going to sidestep a little bit there because there's a couple of things. One is that we have a very big a tradition in the UK of the jazz reflecting a lot of the music that was in South Africa. So I'm very interested in South African music, and a lot of my generation, things like Loose Tubes, I don't know if you knew them, and Django Bates, very influenced by them, and he used to actually play, I think, with Dudu Pukwana. But I've also recently been playing with Francis Fuster, who is a percussion player who was with Hugh Masekela for over 10 years, maybe more. And I've been learning so much from him and so many stories. So and I've been playing some of his music for Hugh Masekela, not all of it, but so I'm kind of, I feel like I'm getting to know, a lot about the country. But I also had the privilege of going to South Africa a few years ago, and I was a judge in the UNISA Jazz Piano Competition, which is in Pretoria. So I actually did have a chance to visit there. So the reason I'm sort of talking about South Africa, obviously it played a big part in your life, but I'm quite interested because you when you went out there, you founded and developed a Centre for Jazz and Popular Music at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and you started the first jazz course there. And I was just interested, really, because I think it said that something, I read this on your website or something, in 1983. So I just wondered if you wanted to say a little bit about that, because obviously in 1983 it was apartheid. You set up a jazz course, which, as you know, is steeped from the black American tradition, although it's not exclusive. And then you go to a country where it's quite segregated. I just wondered how that worked, or my experience, I've spoken to people there, they said it was quite, unusual. It was almost impossible if you weren't white to go to university, and a few people did go, but it was, it was difficult. So what was your experience when you were there?
Well, everything you say is absolutely true, but let's start with where you started in your question, saying it was really a very segregated society. Yeah. And you correctly say some people think that there was absolutely a complete racial barrier to going to university. There was not, but there were so many other kinds of barriers. It might as well have been. In terms of there not being just the very poor secondary education system. Their fees were required to be paid up front. All students had to have matriculation exemption, which very few black students did. And finally, the rules were that people were usually streamed into universities according to racial categories, but there were exceptions. And now here's where the story gets quite rich. It was the policy that if a course was not offered in a university that was designed for your race group, so-called, or your nationality, say you were a person of Indian origin, and you wanted to study dentistry, well, you wouldn't go to BITS, which was set up for white dental students who'd go to University of Durban Westville, which had a dental school. But no university at the time had a jazz course. We were the only one. So our catchment was widened automatically. We had students from of all nationalities, races, language groups, were applying to get to the University of Natal, as it then was, and they could legally come there because there wasn't an equivalent offering in another university. Now that may sound very convoluted, but life was very convoluted.
I mean, from what you're saying to me, if you managed to run a course that integrated people, that at that particular time, that's a really incredible thing, because it wasn't probably that common, I presume, from what you're telling me and from my experiences of talking to people when I was in South Africa.
Andrea, that was very much the point. We had a real, when I say we, my South African wife, Kathy, and I, very much wanted to do it for exactly that reason. And we've been, for the last 2 years, I would say, for the last 2 years, we've been working on a book about that called Playing the Changes, and we've been interviewing a lot of former students, and many of them talk about, it was their first encounter with, if they were white, their first encounter in an equal relationship with Black people and vice versa. And, they were seeing firsthand, everyone was getting along pretty well because they had a common objective, which was learning to play this great music. And like any school, the most learning that takes place really is students between each other. If you have someone who is directing the whole situation that's creating a good platform and provides everything they need, which I think that's basically the biggest claim I can make about the center, great things can happen artistically.
So it'd be great to hear a track now. What do you think would be good for us to hear then?
Well, we've already heard No Molly from that live concert in Poland, and there isn't another South African track on it. So let's go to, this is one of my pieces. It's called Sea of Troubles, and you can hear that it has a kind of narrative structure of being, in a very dark, despairing place where things are really down, and through determination and willpower, optimism, faith, whatever you want to call it, you lift yourself out of it. The sea is still there, but you've reached the shore somehow. See if this track seems to give you that feeling.
That was Sea of Troubles from Live in Poland, and I'm talking to Darius Brubeck. I'm going to ask you one more question, and it's just, you've got so many skills, and I think this is quite typical, to be fair, of musicians. I'm going to list here some of the things that I've read that you've done. So obviously you're a professional jazz musician. You are a composer, not just for jazz, but also other types of music. You're an academic. You've presented papers all over the world. You're obviously an educator. We've just talked about that. I think, you just said you're writing a book. I don't know if that's you or your wife, but
we are together. We're working on it.
A lot of creative stuff there. I mean, I don't think they're actually that different, but I was just wondering if you had a preference. Is there something in all those jobs or whatever, those roles that you have a preference for, or are they just all part of you and that's who you are? That's what I was going to really ask you.
Oh, I think you pretty much nailed it, Andrea. I wouldn't be me if I weren't doing all of these things. I suppose what comes most naturally to me is performing, but there's all the rest of the time. Up until the moment you go on stage, I've still got a mind that's working on other things or imagining ways of understanding, interpreting reality. I mean, and I hope not to sound pompous, but, I'm just a mentally active person and interested in everything. So that's why I do a lot of different things.
I think you've proved that from all the things that we've been talking about, what I've heard. And I really look forward to, I'm going to be coming to your gig on the 14th of December at the Jazz Cafe.
Well, come up and say hello.
I'm definitely going to do that. So thank you so much, Darius Brubeck, for your interview, and I hope the gig goes well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I'll see you there.